Hello everybody. I'm working with Peter, and this is kind of interesting for me. I'm a postdoc in Umeå now, and I live in Finland. So I jumped into this project with Peter, and I have the Finnish perspective. So I actually have kids in Finnish school, but in a Swedish speaking. Now he has sort of opened the floor for me, so you know about Bernstein and you know about the project, the frame of it. And what I'm going to talk about is actually, if I go to the next one, where the red ring has jumped to the Finland 7 to 9 grades. Peter has looked at the classroom observations and done the same analysis as he just talked about in the 1 to 7 grades. And I have now looked at teacher interviews and see how this is related to what he has found. So you already know all of this, the classification, the framing, and so I don't have to repeat that. These are some photos from the examples where, as Peter explained just now, some classrooms are in rows, and this is where the teacher has this traditional power and control, while other classrooms then are as Bernstein's principle of keeping things together, where the students get more power then, and they group them for different. And these are the terminology then used, the collection code and integrated code for this framework, jumping ahead to this excellent diagram, where we can see for these grades, it is two kind of clear clusters that Peter has found about the teachers having the power themselves, and then a group of teachers which are moving towards the student power. As an example, then, this students sitting in the corridors where, as Peter explained just now, they could choose more about the pacing and timing and place and stuff like that. So then to the interview data. These were retrospective interviews done. So they were talking about what the teacher had done in the classroom and talking about their teaching, student learning, assessment, and the changes that had taken place because of the introduction of the tablets in the classrooms. So the guiding pieces for my analysis is that a teacher's beliefs, attitudes, and educational philosophies influence their teaching approaches, and these are important for understanding and improving educational processes. So the questions that I ask, how do the two clusters pertain to power and control relate to how teachers reflect on student learning in a one-to-one classroom, and how teachers perceive the changes introduced by the tablets in their classrooms. So for this, did a dichotomization of the data into two clusters and making two separate groups. And I did a qualitative content analysis using NVivo software, where I first listened to the audio while reading the transcripts. This was really important because I didn't have, I wasn't part of the collection process. So first reading the text was just nonsense. But when I listened to the audio at the same time, I could understand the context of it and the relationships. That was really important. And I did a rough coding of the broadest possible meaning units, and for these themes of the interview. And I selected the learning node, which had 121 references. And for this, I went through all of them and did the smallest possible unit of meaning. So with an NVivo coding, where you take, the text and make a code out of it. So I got 247 of those. And from that, I started an abstraction process interpreting what these nodes, actually the essence of them, what it was. And from this process, I got 7 main categories and 47 subcategories. And from this, I started to do the analysis then with cross-tab queries against the power clusters. And I did the same with the change node. with 93 references and the same process. And these main categories I divided into positive and negative to see how the attitudes fared across the sample. So going to the results, the 7 main categories of teachers' beliefs about, for instance, how learning happens, that's what they talked about from a student perspective, individual differences, learning as a relational practice, learning as building agency and levels of learning, student autonomy, and then teachers' role for student learning. So what they thought their own role was for their learning process. So I will go through these. Not all of them had, you could find differences related to the power clusters. I will explain a few of them a little bit deeper, but I will go through each one of them so you can see how this kind of process goes. And for instance, you can see here up there's a total number, so they had 95 and 96, so they talked equally much about these beliefs about learning. So we jump to the first one, beliefs about how learning happens. For instance, learning from deliberate practice, from dialogue, from mistakes, from progressive knowledge building, from teaching each other, from varying perspectives and modalities, or from visualizing the process and product, or when being motivated. These were things they were talking about. And when you look at these numbers also, you can see, for instance, that there's number 8 there on learning from progressive knowledge on the teacher power. But that doesn't actually mean that it has to be a difference between how they talk about it. It's only a number, but you have to go into the data and see what are the qualitative things they're saying about this. So it's not like a quantitative statistics that you can compare, oh, these are more. You have to go into the data and see, and I couldn't find any difference between them all, how they talked about it, although the number was more in the teacher power cluster. Beliefs about individual differences, for instance, allowing for individualized speed of study, eliminating destructive comparison, providing options for an individualized learning path. That was very strong in student power, but they still talked about it sort of in the same way. And beliefs about learning as a relational practice was something that they all talked a lot about, I think, and that's something that they aimed their didactic towards on a whole, I would say. And here, for instance, comparing and identifying baseline from discussions, competing and gamification is motivating. Cooperation facilitates more active learning, they say. Promoting identity-focused well-being by visualizing learning socially. For instance, they want to show their PowerPoint to everybody when they have done something, or their movie, or put a poster on the wall or something like that. So, and also psychological safety by working with friends. So the teacher here said that if I interview them in this language class, they're so shy, but when they can use it with each other and they can communicate, they're more open, and I can listen from the side. Sharing information to learn from each other was an important one too. Variation of academic ability becomes a strength for learning. So how they have different strengths can kind of be good for the whole. Beliefs about learning as building agency. And these are kind of interesting. And here there are more subcategories. And I was thinking about what Bunsgaard said yesterday. He's not here now, is he now? He said that there were 3 competence categories for computational literacy. And what I found, what teachers said about beliefs about building agency, they talk about digital agency as why to use something, what to use, and how to use it. So it's both a skill and a preference for what to choose, but also motive. Why are we using this right now? And while information agency then is about analyzing and applying skills and then assessing information and seeking information. So these were different how they talked about it. And then meta-learning agency, relational agency, and a self-regulatory agency. They talked about all of these, but not too many differences here either. But this was kind of interesting when it comes to beliefs about levels of learning. And as you can see here, it's in the student power, it's the red. The numbers are in the beginning on the lower levels, and here the teacher power is on the higher levels. But when you go into the subjective data, you can see that it's not about memorization and like that. It's more about the teacher saying, well, at this age level, you don't have to have. Let me see. I have this next one, for instance, here. It's a subject that they don't go so deep under. It's only maybe the names and the most important ones, only on the surface at this age. So kind of keeping the material on an age level. And identify critical information. They have the whole picture, that main ideas of Orthodox Church in that mind map. So that was enough for that. Teacher power excerpts for the application, for instance. They know how the yeast works. That is the most important for me. Learning to create. This teacher is onto something. Pupils make a small video, a movie, how they solve problems. The idea is that the pupils could do more of the material, like videos, that I can use later. So this teacher has an idea of how to create material that can be used further ahead. Grow as a person, to be open-minded, make them good people when they leave here. So these were examples of what they talked about. And beliefs about student autonomy. These are also divided into benefits and concerns, because they talked about like benefits, developing deeper understanding by being autonomous, or learn to take responsibility. And concerns then, it was age inappropriate responsibility, habits of being served in a certain way, or lack of skills, but also new terminology and teaching styles that might be confusing for them. For instance, if the teacher uses a flipped classroom style with a video with some other teacher talking about his subject, but that teacher uses different terminology, which can be confusing. And this is also very much like an age, making it age appropriate to their level of understanding. So when I looked at this data, I saw that they talk about this age appropriate levels of being autonomous in their learning. And when I divided them then by grade, you can see that the teacher power cluster, they are the ones that have the 7th graders who then come into the first year of using iPads as a learning tool. So they talked a lot about needing to have like a period of learning. They need to learn how to use these softwares and apps and the tablet in the right way, and that wasn't always to the satisfaction of the teacher. That, like one said, I'm not an IT guy, I teach my subject, and now the responsibility of also teaching them how to use the iPad fell on them, and which was discussed. For instance, student power teachers or benefits, they understand things better when they search for it themselves. The students can learn more independently, trying to learn themselves, and so I think this is quite also what, when they are learning independently, they are more responsible for their learning. So this is a teacher who is designing for student power, thinks that this is how they should learn. But the concerns were also like you see, this is the same one who has the benefits, but then concerns, they're not taking responsibility for their own learning when they are so young. So then again, this age comes into the picture. Student power. So this is the teacher power, teacher ECER. So concerns for them, they had only concerns. I say and teach the old way, so they will get more information because they can't do anything by themselves. This one sees a lot of problems with this autonomy thing. And also some good pupils had difficulties to find it by themselves, so forth. Skip to the next one. So the last category, subcategory, at least about teachers' role for student learning. You can see that the teacher power cluster talks a lot more about this than the student power cluster. And for instance, well, you can read, adapt material to students' varying needs, answer students' questions, awareness of group dynamics, check knowledge level, emphasize key information, and so forth. But where you see, for instance, in the student power cluster, there's a 0 where the scaffold self-regulation and autonomy. They didn't talk about that while the teacher power cluster did talk, so they were more aware maybe of, or had a class that needed more scaffolding, for instance, regarding autonomy. They're also talking about guide on the side. Like there's seven references to that on the teacher power cluster. And finally, the results about attitudes to change. Here are concerns about students, their discipline. There is a lot to talk about them playing games and stuff, and but also the competence that they lack skills, and this was seen as a negative thing. They're critical about added value for learning. And this is interesting also because they talk, like the 18 references about critical added value for learning. While here in the positive, finding added value for learning and teaching, they have 32. So these teachers talk both about these perspectives. And there are lots of different things that are very difficult for these teachers. For instance, what they talk about, pedagogical, or what was you called it, pedagogical freedom. Yes, they said that the didactic freedom is hindering change in a way. But then they were talking about other teachers. They themselves saw themselves as I'm doing my best, but I can see other teachers are not adjusting to this change, and the didactical freedom is the problem there because they are allowed to do whatever they want. So, and a lot of economic stuff that they talked about, also no compensation for extra effort for doing this, and also a lack of confidence in using iPads were talked about. But then again, the positive, these teachers are being explorative, effortful, and open-minded, and expressed interest and enthusiasm about these. But then again, I looked at how these teachers, when you took each teacher by themselves, you can see that when one says something negative, they also have some positive, so they can kind of see the ambivalence in this picture. And what I did was trying to see if I could find any difference between the grades. And you can see here again the teacher power cluster on 7th graders have a lot to say on these issues. So I think I'm out of time, so I'll skip to this. And looking then at these kind of integrated analysis using crosstabs queries in NVivo is we have to realize it's not a generalizable result. It's about being able to ask more specific questions and look into the material and seeing it as a piece of the puzzle, making triangulation and making the puzzle more 3D in a way. So we still have a long way to go, I think, but this is sort of a step in the process of looking at this bigger data that has been collected. So, thank you.
Thank you.